Análisis BIVA, el podcast donde los principales analistas económicos de México exploran los temas más relevantes en el ámbito económico y financiero, tanto nacionales como internacionales. Los mejores comentarios y perspectivas esenciales para el mercado.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. El día de hoy les tenemos un episodio muy especial porque fue parte de los paneles que tuvimos esta semana en la ciudad de Nueva York para el BIVA Day 2024. Esta es una discusión sobre las condiciones políticas y económicas por las que atraviesa nuestro país y que tuvieron Alejandro de la Vega, socio de Deloitte, Brenda Estefan, conferencista y consultora en relaciones internacionales, y Enrique Perret, director ejecutivo de la US Mexico Foundation. Estoy seguro que será de su interés.
Welcome everyone. Bienvenidos. That's Maria Arisa. For those who are coming from Mexico, welcome to New York, and thank you for doing the trip. For those who are here in the U.S., welcome to a Mexican space, and hope you learn something from this. I think my role here is as a moderator, facilitator, whatever you want to call it, is for these two persons that are on my sides to give you some knowledge. I hope, I truly hope, you leave this room with some knowledge, okay? We're gonna touch on different things, and I discussed with Brenda and Alejandro. I'm sorry, I call you Brenda, but it's Brenda. I discussed with them to talk about some perspective, economic perspective from the data that we have right now, but also political and social forecast in Mexico and in the U.S. We're gonna talk a lot about the U.S.-Mexico relationship. We need to talk about China and as a factor of the relationship between Mexico and the U.S., okay? I think there is a big question mark in Mexico on the role of Mexico regarding China and regarding the U.S. We need to solve that question mark as soon as possible with our partners in the U.S., and I think it's on us to solve that issue. So we're going to start on that. I'm Enrique Perret. I'm the head of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation based in Washington. We have an office in Mexico, and what we do is basically to do research and public diplomacy to have a better relationship between Mexico and U.S. I know there is a gray cloud right now on that, but we know the factors are there, and we need to exploit those factors, okay? So I'm going to start with Brenda on those that forecast on the political and social aspects just for the U.S.-Mexico relationship and Mexico in particular. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's no secret that the Mexico-U.S. relationship is undergoing political turmoil. This is influenced clearly by the upcoming election on November 5th in the U.S., but also because of the Mexican political landscape. We have a very long transition period in between the June 2nd elections, where Claudia Sheinbaum was elected president, and her inauguration on October 1st. And we also have a lot of question marks on where is Claudia Sheinbaum going to go on key pressing agenda items in Mexico. So to start with the Mexican part of it, on June 2nd, the big surprise was not the win of the ruling party, Morena. It was the scale of it. And they managed to assure a supermajority in the Chamber of Deputies. They got 7 out of 9 governorships that were up for grabs. They got 26 of the local legislatures control. And this evident concentration of power raised a lot of concerns about the worst vices of the one-party rule coming back to Mexico. One needs to acknowledge that it's not concentration of powers that really worries investors. If we look at United Arab Emirates or at Vietnam or Singapore, these are countries with a strong hold of power, with a strong concentration of power, and with a lot of foreign direct investment. What worries more investors is the abuse of this power. And this is where Claudia's role as a president will be key, because even if Mexico has always had a presidential system, what President Sheinbaum wants and decides and will have a more crucial role than ever in the coming years, as with her role as president. And so whether her administration will go on to intervene in economic or investment matters, it's something that everyone is asking. And I think we won't be able to really know her stand on a lot of positions until October 1st, but we can see from her public declarations that she won't depart completely from López Obrador's stance, but she'll make a mark of her own. And so if we think López Obrador is pushing forward this judicial reform and also this constitutional reform that would strip its independency to autonomous agencies. And we need to see this through the focus of someone who's leaving office, who has one foot out, and who on September 30 is leaving office. But Claudia is entering, and she has a 6-year term ahead. So there's one question mark there, but I would have to turn to the U.S. side of the equation and realize that the bilateral relationship is also being used as a punching bag on this side of the border. We recently heard former President Donald Trump say, even mentioning the possibility of trade between the U.S. and Mexico being completely canceled. This is an electoral rhetoric. We need to acknowledge that President Trump is someone who drives international relationship through the lens of realpolitik. And because of that, he knows that the relationship of the U.S. with the region, with North America, and particularly with Mexico, it's key to the global U.S. competitiveness. And just to underline this, 80% of the products that are exported from Mexico to the U.S. are intermediate goods. That means that they're going to be further completed in the U.S., and the U.S. is going to get the price of those, putting those products or those goods into the markets, and obviously getting a big share of that profit that this integration of trade creates. And the other big figure is that almost 50% of exports that come from Mexico to the U.S. are by U.S.-owned companies. So if tariffs were going to be established in those products, that would create inflation in the U.S., and it would diminish the U.S. competitivity. So it doesn't seem likely. And besides all these big headlines, the pause that López Obrador suggested with the U.S. Embassy and the Canadian Embassy because of their ambassador's remarks regarding the judicial reform, we need to acknowledge that there are key interests that stand and persist. So one of course, in terms of economy, we have remittances, we have trade, we have investments, but also in terms of challenges, we have a shared border of over 2,000 miles that we need to manage. We have the security in the region, in North America, coping good with organized crime. And so these, all these factors are not going to move away, and especially with what Enrique was mentioning, the China factor, which we will probably talk about later.
Under the U.S.-Mexico relationship, there is a reflection that I have that, I mean, for many years, and probably all of us have been talking about a friendship relationship, right? We're friends, we're neighbors, we're even family. 8 out of 10 homes in Mexico have a relative in the U.S., right? 8 out of 10 homes in Mexico have a relative living in the U.S. So we talk about friendship, we talk about neighborhood, we talk about, family, but that's not the game. The game is to be allies, not friends. We need to understand, and that's my reflection. I'm not telling you to believe this, but I have been a promoter of Mexico for many years. I worked 12 years for ProMéxico, an agency that disappeared 6 years ago. I came the first event that Maria did here in New York for the BIVA, for the Amex Cap Day in that moment. But we're not friends. If you go to the Hill right now, in the Capitol Hill in Washington, and you ask the members of Congress in the U.S., who are the top 10 allies of the U.S., Mexico is not there, okay? It's Japan, it's Germany, it's Australia, it's UK, it's India. Mexico is not there. And it's because we have this chip in our mind that we need to be friends. And sorry, but friends don't do business. Not all friends do business. We are partners. And there is interest in the U.S., and there is some particular interest in Mexico. If we don't understand the interest of each other, it's going to be very hard to do the next step. I'll give you that reflection. Allies, not friends. That doesn't mean that you cannot be friends with the Americans. Americans, you're brothers, okay? But we need to think as a country. We need to think as a country. And countries have interest. And in the U.S., the best interest of the U.S. is national security. If we are not playing that role in Mexico, and it's in every single local, state, federal government, companies, for the case of China, if we are not playing that role of allies, it's going to be very hard. But let's go with the perspective, economic perspective, okay?
Sure. Well, thank you. I agree. We're business partners more than anything, and that's very important. I think, I mean, coming from yesterday from the Amex Cap, it's hard to repeat everything, but yeah, the economic perspective looks well. You know, the economic growth is easing. That's something that we all know, coming down from 2.5 to 1.5%. But the opportunities are huge, and I think we were talking about earlier about what messages need to be given by the new government. No, I think the first ones, and these are facts. You know, the cabinet is very well constructed. You know, the profiles are different. That's very true. And what will they do? That's the question mark. What will they do once they're in office, right? So we're in a couple of tough months. But I think once the cabinet is installed, and we will start seeing the new messages, the investment will keep on flowing. You know, it's easy to say that right now, yeah, investment is also easing. Foreign direct investment is increasing, of course, but no new investments. The increase of that foreign direct investment is not new investments. Why? Because it's natural in any transition. So I think the opportunity is there. I think you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You know, the mechanisms for doing business, specifically in my field, infrastructure is there. So we have a huge opportunity ahead of us, and we need to take advantage of that, despite who's governing. You know, the important thing is Mexico doesn't need new rules, new leadership, but it goes by itself right now, despite who's in office.
It's very good that you touch on the reinvestment versus the green fields, right? We have, I think, many of us have seen these graphics, these numbers on right now. The reinvestments are bigger than in other moments of Mexico foreign direct investment. I don't believe that's a bad signal, and let me explain. If HP, 3M, General Motors keep betting on Mexico with their reinvestments, we need to take into consideration that in Mexico, most of the Fortune 500, most of the top 10,000 biggest companies in the U.S. are already in Mexico. So if they keep reinvesting, I think it's a very good signal. But I see a lot of criticize saying, well, those are reinvestment. Well, the new factory of HP in Juarez is creating the same amount of jobs as a new green field. So for me, new jobs in technology, essential industries, if it's reinvestment, believe me, they competed that investment with other countries. It's reinvestment, yes, but that money could go to another place. So at the end, the board of directors or the committee decided to stay in Mexico, and that's a good decision. I mean, just because I had that in mind, and sorry, and thank you for reminding me on that. So for the last 2 years, we have been talking about this third Mexican moment, right? The first NAFTA agreement, something that we pushed. I mean, Mexico, U.S. pushed. Then the big reforms in 2012, something that also we pushed. But in the last 2 years, our narrative was there are many, many stars aligning for Mexico, right? From the new technologies, electromobility, telecom, and many others, aerospace, transportation, many others, semiconductors. The relationship between U.S. and China obviously benefited Mexico. I mean, many things happening outside Mexico get aligned for a Mexico third moment. And looks like the geopolitics of the world gives Mexico another opportunity. The question to my two colleagues here is if we're losing that moment, or is just a cloud in a paradise that is still there and we need to navigate that cloud?
Well, I think hopefully it's a cloud. It's highly influenced by the political moment in both sides of the border. So we would have to wait and see how things develop. But there are some certainties that are still there. As I mentioned before, we have common interests, we have common challenges that we need to face together. And in the case of Mexico, there's a lot to be done that would drive the next administration to probably take a shift in the approach to its world, not only the U.S.-Mexico relationship, but Mexico's world stance. And in that regard, Mexico has benefited from trade integration with the U.S. Since the implementation of NAFTA in 1994 up to now, Mexico has experienced continuous growth and development. But there is always this factor that all the jobs are focused on the manufacturer. And we've become a manufacturing powerhouse. We're the biggest exporter to the US, but we need to change the balance and include technology in Mexico. So we talk a lot about investment attraction factors in Mexico that need to be addressed, like infrastructure, workforce, having a more high-skilled workforce, energy, and especially green energy that needs to be abundant for investments to come, water, but we don't talk that much about technology. And Mexico needs to make an effort to be able to connect itself with global consortia in this wave of relocation of enterprises to be able to actually grab these opportunities and don't let the moment pass. And that's something that has some good news around the corner. We have the investment of Amazon Web Services of $5 billion US dollars in Querétaro. They're building a data region, a data center, which will position Mexico likely like a technology hub in the region. This is ongoing, and they're poised to start operations early next year. And so I do think there are good signs on this technology environment that would probably help Mexico to be positioned in a better place to make the most out of this moment that I think still is there, but we need to make sure that those clouds are moved around to be able to see that bright future ahead in the bilateral relationship and in Mexico's international role.
Let me add to that, and I'll ask you, Alejandro, about demographics. I truly believe demographics, it's destiny for Mexico. More than any other thing, I mean, obviously, geography is destiny for Mexico, but it's there. Demographics, you could make a bad change or a good change. and you can take advantage of that. Mexico media age right now, the media in Mexico is 29 years old, okay? In the US, it's 39, according to the census in 2020. In Canada, it's 41. If you go to specific sectors, like the manufacturings in the US, it's 43 years old, the average. So I see Emilio Cadena here, he talks a lot about the employment of choice. And in the US, most of the young people, population, don't pick to work in a manufacturing facility, right? And that's why the Rust Belt is struggling a lot in the US, and you know, that Beto from Chicago here knows very well that industry. But it's not going to be there for always, right?
And if I could add, if we compare China, China is going in the opposite direction. It's losing populations starting 2017. It got to its peak of population, and it's diminishing. So against our biggest trade competition, we are gaining ground.
Now, the replacement rate in Mexico, it's very low right now. You need 2.5, the replacement rate of born kids to replace your population. Right now is 2.2. So there is a lot of countries that have replaced that with foreign workers, right? In Mexico, we cannot do that. We cannot bring people to the workforce, okay? Mexico is a 160 country in the list of the UN as a foreign-born people living in the country. You have 129 million people living in Mexico. There is only 1.2 million of foreign-born people living in Mexico. Half of them are kids that are Mexican Americans with just US passport that return to Mexico. So we don't have diversity in our workforce in Mexico right now. It's very easy to make a move there. We always talk about to attract investment. Right now, it's more important to attract talent. If we don't bring the talent of the future, you won't bring the investment of the future. You can bring a lot of manufacturings right now. If you don't bring the talent of AI for the future, we won't have investment in the future. So for me, it's demographics, talent, talent, talent. Alejandro.
Yeah, one other driver is specifically is infrastructure. You know, the last administration, we didn't have an infrastructure plan in place. There were big projects, we all know about them, but this time I mean, at least the early signals are very different. You know, there's an infrastructure plan in place. There's even a board, an infrastructure board within SCT, within the Ministry of Communications. That's something we haven't seen. You know, we're going back, if you look back at Calderón and the Peña administrations, they both had an infrastructure plan. Even if half of that is executed, you know, the growth perspectives are very different. And I think infrastructure is a big driver for that. So we need to capture that opportunity, because the others are more inertial. You know, trade will keep on going on. Investment is there. You know, you were talking about what brings money. Well, the carry trade, of course, we have. You know, we're the highest paying investment grade country in the world. You know, nobody pays 10% and has an investment grade. So the clouds are there, yes. I think just to talk 1 minute about the potential clouds that we have is losing our sovereign credit rating. I think the new government needs to be very careful, specifically on that, how they handle, you know, Pemex indebtedness and the potential debt. The trade of that debt for sovereign debt. I think that's something they need to really push. They're not going to have a lot of space. We were talking about earlier in the how they spend money next year and the years ahead. You know, there's too much compromises already. So they need private investment badly, and they have that opportunity. You know?
So adding to the complexity of all these factors that we have talked, let me add the component of the Southeast in Mexico, and I won't say versus, but I mean, we have we always said in Mexico, obviously the border region, the northern region have developed much more fast than the southern east region. But sometimes we see it as a trade, right? We need to invest in the south, and we don't need to invest in the north or in the center. I see it in the other way. We need to invest in both sides, right? The north needs to help the south. Yes, the south needs different things than the north, especially infrastructure. But I want your take on that. We have seen big investment in the south on gas pipelines, for example. TC Energy and Sempra are doing huge investment.
NG is another.
NG is another
expansion.
one. So what's your take on that discussion? Because sometimes in the narrative, on the political and social environment, it looks like, well, we all need to bet on the south, but we forget about the north, and the north could be a huge factor of development for the south.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's a lack of infrastructure, and that's all around the country. We need infrastructure in terms of schools, universities, airports. I mean, everything is welcome, and it's welcome both north and south, because north, as you said, it's the economic powerhouse of the country and could drive the south. But we need it everywhere, and I think that's a challenge that's ahead for Mexico. Alejandro was mentioning, and I totally agree with him, the political will hasn't been aligned with a pipeline of infrastructure projects. We don't have a pipeline of infrastructure projects, and that's dramatic, because when López Obrador came into office, he had the project of the new airport, but there was no political will to continue with it. And then he had the political will to push forward the Transísmico and the Tren Maya, and the Maya train, but he didn't have a project. And it took him several years to be able to develop those projects. So what we are
looking... I can
assure
you there's a huge list of projects in all sectors. They haven't released everything.
Yeah,
they just touched a little bit on toll roads and stuff, but there's a huge... we were part of that. So.
I think what's happening now, that's changing, and I think it's a challenge for Mexico to have that political will aligned with that list of projects. And just coming back briefly to the geopolitical environment that drives all these changes, I think the triangle between Mexico, China, and the U.S. will be key in the following years. We'll see it on the USMCA revision in 2026. It's something that's going to come up. We see how officials in Washington are worried about the Chinese investments in Mexico. And as Enrique rightly mentioned, of course, Chinese investments are growing in the country. But we need to strengthen in this agenda the communication between Mexico City and Washington to make sure that as allies, we don't step on key issues of national interest to the U.S. or of national security, meaning that if China wants to invest in Mexico to create furniture and sell it to the Mexican market, that's all right. If China wants to come into the Mexican soil and build electric vehicles or technology that would harm or somehow put the national security of the U.S. at stake, then we need to stop it. And to be able to distinguish that, we need to enhance the communication between officials, not to diminish it and not to menace each other with tariffs if this Chinese investment continues to flow. We actually need a more open and developed conversation about these topics in the current geopolitical environment, because the rivalry between the U.S. and China is not going anywhere. And if there's one issue where both Democrats and Republicans agree on, it's in this. So Mexico City needs to work closely with its biggest trading partner regarding this agenda.
I'll take two questions from the audience. We had 5, now 2 minutes. We have 3 minutes for a question in the audience. Let's go here in the front.
No, I'm talking about concentration of power. If you look at the political landscape in Mexico, even though more than 50% of people living in the capital cities is ruled by the opposition, besides that data, everything else favors Morena. And if you look at, for instance, Yucatan, which was a stronghold or supposed to be a stronghold of the opposition, is now in Morena's hands. So what you clearly see and that's regarding of anyone's political views. It's the concentration of power in one sole political party, which is Morena. So which use is going to Morena do of this? It's what will determine the outlook that the markets will take towards Mexico, I think. And so I compared it just in terms of concentration of power, because it's important to know that concentration of power per se doesn't necessarily translate into instability and insecurity for investors. That was it.
Alejandro, one last comment.
I think we need to talk about the positives. Mexico is and will still be, the best opportunity in Latin America. Brazil is on its own, but we're the second biggest market there. So let's take advantage of that in our fields. That would be my conclusion.
Super. So with that, we didn't talk about the U.S. elections. That's obviously another big factor. I think is going to be the biggest factor. But I hope the next panel maybe touch on U.S. elections. Thank you so much for your attention.
La Bolsa Institucional de Valores presentó Análisis BIVA. Suscríbete a nuestro podcast y síguenos en todas nuestras redes sociales.